I'm Marc Michaud, co-creator of Home, and you're listening to the True North Country Comics podcast.
Welcome to the True North Country Comics podcast, dedicated to promote Canadian comic book creators and supporters. It's August 13th, 2021. I'm John Swinimer. If you want to drop me a line, you can contact me at john@truenorthcountrycomics.com. On this episode, I chat with Marc Michaud about the Home series. This podcast is available on Apple Podcasts and Google Podcasts. It's also available on the True North Country Comics channel on YouTube. I invite you to like and subscribe. Marc, along with his brother Daniel, grew up on a farm on the Great Canadian Plains under some of the most expansive skies on the planet. They shared a love of comics and dreamed of one day creating them together. Their ongoing black and white science fiction graphic novel series Home consists of two distinct yet linked series, Arc 29 and Demeter. Arc 29 by Marc, and nominated for a Betelgeuse Award in 2019, tells a story of a young man inheriting a spaceship and coming to terms with his newfound responsibilities. Demeter, by Daniel, recounts the struggle of colonizing a new and harsh planet under impossible circumstances. And so, without further ado, here's my chat with Marc Michaud about the Home series. So, Marc Michaud, thank you very much for taking time to chat with me.
Absolutely, my pleasure.
I appreciate your time. What I normally do to start off the interview is ask the creator about their first comic book. So I'm wondering if you remember, what was the first comic book you remember reading?
Sure. Well, I'll give you a little bit of a complicated answer because we kind of always had some comics in the house. You know, Archie comics were kind of just kicking around. And things like Garfield, early on, Garfield was what kind of got me going as a very young kid. But then when I was in the fourth grade, one of my best friend's parents owned the local convenience store. And so he gave me, I think it was Uncanny X-Men 265. And if it's not the introduction of Gambit, it's the issue before or right around that time. And I had not really been exposed to superheroes up to that point, and that just really transformed. It was a transformative moment for sure. That just really lit a fire in me. And after that, there was just no looking back. Just
cool.
Yeah.
Good inspiration there. But I'm wondering who or what inspires you to create today?
No, I mean I have a family, so I, of course, the obvious answer is that I'm inspired by to produce for them. But in terms of creators that I enjoy, there's a long list of people who, if they don't directly inspire my work or change the way that my work looks, it certainly is work that when I look at it, I feel inspired to do better, work harder, if that makes sense. So I'm not sure. I'll just throw some names out, but Artyom Trakhanov, who drew First Knife over at Image, and Seven Deadly Sins with TKO is one. Tonchi Yonzic is another that I'm a big fan of. Chris Samney, Daniel Warren Johnson. There's a Chip Zdarsky, Ramon K. Perez series that's ongoing right now that I'm really enjoying. So things like this, that when I read it just makes me want to up my game, I guess.
Sure, absolutely. Makes sense. So we're here talking about your latest project, Home. And I'm wondering if you could talk a wee bit about it, maybe describe the story, and maybe the origins of it as well.
Sure. Well, that also is a bit of a long story. I've been working on it a long time, and I work on it with my brother, but I'll get to that point soon enough. But the first volume of Home, which came out in North America this past February, initially was released in Malaysia in 2017, and was actually finished in 2015. So with my family, we moved to Malaysia in 2015, and through a series of events, I met a publisher over there who was interested, wanted to publish it, and I had not found a publisher in North America yet, so I couldn't think of a reason not to. So it exists as a book in the Malaysian and Singaporean markets. When I came back to Canada, I had book one in hand, and I used that to be able to find a publisher here, and it took a while between finding the publisher and the first book coming out for a number of reasons. The pandemic played a role in there as well. It's still kind of playing a role. It's putting a small delay on book 2, which should be out soon, but there's a bit of an issue there with paper supplies. So anyway, it'll be out very soon. So so that's kind of how it came to be where it is now. So book 1 for me is kind of distant. I've moved on from it, but I'm glad that it's out in North America now.
Sure. And how would you describe the story to someone?
Well, it's science fiction, but it's much more character-based. So smaller kind of human-scale stories with a science fiction background. It has kind of a rural feeling. I wouldn't call it a Western feeling, but somewhat of a rural feeling. So I kind of describe it as, Star Trek meets the Little House on the Prairie. And, so that's kind of what you can expect in terms of the feel.
Okay. When I read it, I got this sort of feel of Starlost, TV series from the 70s with Keir Dullea. Don't know if you remembered that. That was probably before your time.
I'm not familiar with it, but I'm going to write the name down because I always like to, there's another movie that, I forget what it's called, but
Silent Running, perhaps.
Silent Running. That's the one that somebody mentioned to me one time after having read it, and I had not seen the movie, but I've since seen it, and I see the clear line between the two works, even if I'd never seen it. So it's always fun to see those kinds of things that are I guess mining the same vein.
Right. Yeah. You definitely have a unique take on the whole thing, but it's just curious because I remember that when I was growing up back in my day, and Starlost was like, it's science fiction with these biodomes that are traveling through space, and these 3 characters meet up with various people on the way. So different storyline completely, but along the same vein, as you say, that's for sure.
Sure.
So as you mentioned, you work on this project with your brother Daniel, and unfortunately couldn't join our call, but I wonder if you could talk a bit about the collaboration process with him in creating these stories.
Yeah, so the initial story came to me, like I said, a while ago, and this idea of the captain inheriting a spaceship, a generational spaceship that never completed its mission for reasons unknown for now. That was the kind of the initial idea, and I wanted this captain to have come from a planet that had been colonized, but due to whatever reasons had returned to I won't say a primitive state, but to a more primitive state than when they first arrived. So, he's coming from a planet that essentially would resemble what pioneers in Canada might have encountered, in the early 1900s, something like this. That's the kind of the idea, and this is something that Daniel and I have been talking about a long time. We wanted to kind of do comics kind of seriously, a little bit of a soap opera set in a pioneer environment. And then, so the idea of doing that through the lens of science fiction, having it on a colony rather than setting it in Canada and making it any sort of a historical fiction, we just like the idea of setting it in a just slightly different world than ours, but still something that is kind of relatable in terms of our fairly recent history, I guess.
Mm-hmm. And the connection is that he is writing in the past and you're writing in present or future. Is that how it works?
Yeah, like the idea is that he's if in the future we have sent off let's say 150. I don't have a number. It's not really important. But let's say we've sent off a whole bunch of these generational ships as essentially seeds into the universe, and some take better than others, and some are able to maintain the level of technology at which they arrive and stay part of the network. Others just kind of fall off and continue humanity, but on a much smaller scale. So that we wanted to set our planet as one of these that gets kind of cut off from the rest. And since my story was set well into the future, the colony exists and has survived, even though it was difficult. And so let's say 400 years after the colonization, my character would leave and pursue his adventure that I'm telling in the story. So Daniel's story would be telling the colonization, which is, something like 450 years prior to the story that I'm telling. So there are, no shared characters necessarily. The robot maybe, but, other than that, it'll be, maybe shared locations and ideas, maybe even family names, things like this, but there won't be, the connection, a direct connection between the two stories. It'll stay fairly distant. We consult each other for all the major story points and all of these types of things, but he is really telling his story and I'm really telling my story, and we just make sure that everything works out, because we're constantly communicating, showing each other pages, taking advice and input between the two of us as we do tell our own unique stories.
Yeah, they're very intriguing, that's for sure. When you sent the preview copy, I was waiting for what happens next, so very intriguing. And I guess someone is a big golf fan, because that pops up a few times.
Yeah, actually, what's funny about that, it is funny because at the time I really wasn't a golf fan. I just tried to think of some sort of a leisure activity that could eat up a whole bunch of time if you were in an enormous biodome.
Right.
And so golf came to mind. I was like, okay, that'd be interesting, especially if you have this this mechanism that allows you to change the terrain somewhat, to change up the course. These types of things. It could be a fun idea, and just it becomes a location to be able to essentially tell stories or whatever it is. And as I started drawing it, I was doing research to make sure that I stayed, at least consistent. And through the drawing of the golf is how I kind of came to fall in love with the sport. So now I am really a fan of the sport, but I really wasn't at first. I kind of just found it boring, and I didn't understand, the basics of the game. It just escaped me. But now I really do enjoy it a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. It's a shame, though, the golf courses are disappearing. It's, I think, part of progress, unfortunately. But it's nice to be able to get out, that's for sure.
Yeah, of course. Like there's it's kind of a weird, problematic thing in the real world, but it's, I get it.
Yeah. I want to switch gears a wee bit and talk about the tools you use to create your art. I wonder if you could walk me through your creation process.
Sure. So the I guess what I would call like the gestation period, when I'm coming to the point of writing, because I don't write a script in the traditional sense. I really just will thumbnail the story out with notes, usually pretty heavy notes on the side. Sometimes bits of dialogue that I thought of that I really wanted to stick to, or really pretty dense notes on a single 8.5 by 11 sheet. I have 4 pages, so facing pages in terms of the thumbnails, and so I will just kind of think about the story elements, think about what I want to do. I'll have lists all over the place of the key points that I want to hit in story as I'm trying to work it all out. And then eventually, when I feel that I'm ready, I just kind of sit down and hammer out the thumbnails, and work from there. With the thumbnails, I'm able to see if the story is kind of working or not, make the changes that I feel are necessary. From there, I bring it into the computer. And using Clip Studio, I will scan those thumbnails, which are really very small. A page is about maybe 2 inches by 1.5 inches, and I'll either scan those and blow those up, or I'll just redraw them completely in a pretty rough state. Nothing too detailed. Again, it's more to make sure that the storyline is working. And at this point is when I'll work in my dialogue, so that I know where my speech bubbles will be, how big they are, and then my pencils get done digitally inside of Clip Studio, which I then print out on an 11.5 piece of bristle board in a very light blue kind of pencil line, which I then ink traditionally using, depending on the. I guess it depends on the chapter. Sometimes I'll want a different finish. So I've used everything from technical pens to brush and ink, and kind of everything in between.
Yeah, it's quite unique sort of process there. You go from traditional to digital and back to traditional through your process. Book
1 actually for me was entirely digital, but I just kind of miss the tactility of the page in front of you. And I also like having, at the end of the day, I like having that page in front of me as well. Even if, I mean, it exists as a digital page that gets edited. A lot of the times there'll be some changes. Sometimes I'll completely redraw a hand or even an entire face if I'm not happy with it digitally. Mm-hmm. And I'm fairly certain that the reader will never be able to tell the difference. But at the end of the day, I still like having the page in front of me.
Sure. No, that makes sense. For sure. I was going to ask, since you're in the Montreal area, you've been to the Montreal Comic Festival?
Yeah, I have. I tabled there a couple of times, actually.
Nice. Yeah, I'm hoping to get there once we get through all this stuff. I hear very good things about it. Traditionally, at these types of festivals, you're approached by a variety of people, and I'm sure you get inundated with questions about how to do comic books. So I'm wondering, what one piece of advice would you give to someone who's starting out to make their own comic book?
But I think I would give them the advice that I would have liked to have heard when I was younger, because I'm a bit of an old head. I'm coming into the game later. I had a family first. I was a stay-at-home dad, and that's kind of when I drew the first book, was when I was raising my kids. So, and I hesitated a long time before getting down to doing a book, if only because I had convinced myself that I wasn't up to the standard that I wanted. I just wasn't good enough yet, and I think I would have just said, you have to do it and you'll get better as you go along. Just get down to the drawing table, make that story that you've got to tell, and it'll get better as it goes.
You'll learn along the way, I guess.
Yeah.
Very good. That's good advice for sure. Well, we've talked about home and various versions of it. I'm wondering if you have any up-and-coming projects that you can talk about today.
Well, basically it's continuing in that same universe. I've already finished book 3. Daniel is well into his book 3, and I've already finished well into I'm about 2/3 of the way through book 4. So I'm just basically now that we have a publisher and everything's going, I'm just going to plow ahead and keep telling the stories. As long as there's interest, I've got stories to tell in this universe.
Very good. Now, did I remember correctly that Lev Gleason is your new publisher?
Yeah, they're independent. The New Friday is for the creator-owned independent books. Yeah.
Oh, very good. Now, how did that come about?
I was tabling at TCAF in 2018. Mm-hmm. So I had come back from Malaysia with literally suitcases overloaded with copies of the Malaysian version of Book 1. And so I tabled at TCAF, and Keith, the kind of editor-in-chief over there, he kind of came by the table, was looking through the book, showed some interest, so he bought a copy, and then from there, he initiated contact with us, and it was, like I said, it was a long process between the time that communication started and it all got, published. But he kind of sought us out at TCAF.
Nice. There you go. I'm glad it all worked out for you.
Yeah. So far, so good. Yeah, I'm happy it's out, and the book looks nice, and I'm really anxious to see book 2. Unfortunately, with the delays, but I'm really looking forward to having it in hand. Yeah.
Good. I'm wondering where you recommend others go to find out more about your current and future projects online.
I have a website that is not very often updated, but I have copies of Book 1 are available through the website. If you buy it from me, I will sign it and put a drawing in there and other bonuses. Anything that if anybody happens to order through the website, they'll generally get a nice little extra on the side. And I've got in there also kind of mini comic versions of basically every book. As I complete it, I make a mini comic version of it. Only publish a very small number of them and sell them to friends and just locally, and on the website as well. So if people are so interested to want to know what's coming up, these are, and they're not the finished version either. There's a good chance that things might change before the published book, but it's a way to get it out there and let people see.
And that's at homecomics.ca.
Yes.
Thanks to Marc for the chat. You can discover more about Marc on Twitter at ARC29comic and online at homecomics.ca. And thanks to you for listening to the True North Country Comics podcast. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to and like this podcast on Apple Podcasts. And please leave a good rating. Also check out the TrueNorthCountryComics.com website and follow along on Twitter at True North Comics. True North Country Comics is now on YouTube. Please like and subscribe to that video channel. Please send your feedback to John at TrueNorthCountryComics.com. Thanks again for listening, and come back soon for another episode. Bye for now. True North Country Comics podcast is copyright True North Country Comics, copyright 2021.